There's a news item that I found spectacular that I think probably most people did not see. So in a little city in Washington, a man was stabbed after telling a stranger that he's a Christian. As Como News reported, a thug walked up and stabbed an innocent person and his dog at a nearby corner store, right? Okay. At a nearby corner store after learning his victim was a Christian. The incident reported happened Sunday morning at nearby corner store in Parkland, Washington. After being knifed, the victim called 911 at 6:24 a.m. to report the incident. Police discovered that he and his dog were severely injured when they arrived on the scene. When deputies arrived, the victim was in serious condition and told deputies the unknown man had come up to him and asked what religion he was. The victim answered the man had said something about being a Christian, and the man then attacked and stabbed the victim and his dog before fleeing southbound. They found the guy in someone else's backyard. He had several knives on him. According to the reports, he appeared to start approaching the police officers. He was gunned down and he was killed in somebody's backyard. So, crazy, crazy little event. The local reports have interviews from neighbors, and this is like 2 hours later, the cops found him and shot him. So 8:45-ish in the morning, the neighbor said it was not unusual to hear gunshots in that neighborhood, so it really didn't wake most of them up. So it sounds like a little bit of a sketch neighborhood to begin with. However, we've now got this headline where someone who just says, I'm some kind of Christian or admits to being a Christian, then just gets attacked randomly. This is actually not that far from the experience of early Christians in the mid-100s to the 200s AD. The Roman Empire had created such a negative stereotype about Christians that they would face all kinds of these kinds of social pressures and backlash against who they were, difficulty in finding jobs, bits and pieces of persecution around the empire, depending on what governor you lived under. But you just had a cultural atmosphere of Christians are weirdos, they're dangerous. The ancient Romans used to claim that Christians were atheists. They were baby killers and they would eat babies. That's what they believed was happening with communion. So something like this is not too shocking when you realize that you've got a culture where at least parts of the culture have convinced all sorts of people that Christians are Nazis, we're Gestapo soldiers, we're colonialists, we're racists, we're misogynists, we're boom, 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 boom. Then you're just going to end up with some individuals whose brains are not firing in all the right ways, doing stuff like this. So Christians have been here. Christians around the world are in this place, and now some poor dude and his dog in a city in Washington face this, right? So we go from good news to even more gooder news. So Tim Walz has been in the news lately, and this is one of the reasons you did not know that he made a headline recently. So this is a great one. Everything to know on Satanism. Governor Tim Walz is thanked by devil worshippers for his support. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is a Satan booster, exclamation mark. That's just how the clickbait worked. Meanwhile, a story about Governor Tim Walz appeared. Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz announced he will not disrupt a satanic display at the state's Capitol building. Walz, a spokesman, said the First Amendment means that he does not police speech in the state capitol. I'm not convinced that's completely true. The Satanists saluted Walz with a plaque inscribed with the following thanks, and this is a photograph of the plaque that they hung up. The Democratic Coalition of Satan Worshippers, sorry, thanks Governor Tim Walz for not standing in the way of spreading Satanism in the state capitol building. Satan has a special place for you. Is that an ominous warning, or is that a good thing? I don't. So there's a little bit of your insight into Governor Tim Walz, right? Aside everything else that's going on. In the middle of that plaque on that statue, the Satanic Temple gave him, it's a photograph of this statue that they have in their headquarters. And if you go to their website, this is a big deal to them. You can apply to have special events and weddings and ceremonies in this room with a statue of Baphomet. So this is an ancient visual description of what is believed to be a way of displaying Satan, Beelzebub himself. Bephmot is how the name of this thing is spelled. So this is what's actually in their building. So the goat head, the goat feet, the satanic symbolism with the fingers, the pentagram on the head, behind the head, the horns. And just so that you know that it's not dangerous, you got two little kids looking up at them, having a wonderful time, right? In the older versions of this, now you should know this because you'll see a lot of this kind of thing. And the body is the body of a man, but it's kind of an emaciated, kind of skeletized version of a man. In the older versions of this, this creature is androgynous, both male and female. So the older versions of the Baphomet transgress the lines of male and female, right? So don't lose track of how meaningful those little kinds of details are when it comes to the influence of Satan inside of cultures when he is worshiped, when God is pulled out of culture and these kinds of things start rising to the surface. Then you dig a little bit deeper into these things. You're not too surprised that the things that our culture, parts of our culture are valuing, have been valued by satanic worship for a very, very long time now. So Tim Walls has his feet over a fire that he may not be able to control right now. I do want to talk for a minute or two about some of the anti-ICE agitation that's going on inside of Minneapolis because of a couple of things that have come up. So a lot of what's going on in Minneapolis right now is the result of two 20-something independent journalists with microphones and cameras. And so one guy is exposing all of this stuff with Somali daycares, and it goes further and further than that, billions and billions and billions of dollars of fraud. This other young man by the name of Cam Higbee has embedded himself inside of a lot of these protests, and he got himself into what's called a Signal chat. So now Signal is a platform that's used a little bit like a group text messaging, but it uses end-to-end encryption. It's supposed to be unbreakable, so you get in there and you create these chats if you want them to remain private. He got into one of them and started downloading all the information of the people who are in there and screenshotting what they're doing and how the anti-ICE protesters are coordinating in the background. And just in the last 48 hours, 2.5, 3 days, the stuff that he has discovered and has put out has just absolutely exploded the whole thing. So nobody can believe anymore that you've got a lot of grassroots stuff that's just spontaneously happening. Inside of these Signal chats, it is a highly coordinated, and it turns out, incredibly well-funded way of doing things. So as he and others go through these Signal chats and they talk about what's happening on the ground in Minneapolis, we're not talking about random protests. What we're talking about is something that's far closer to a communist revolution. Now that sounds crazy, but you need to understand that they believe that they are on the vanguard of a communist revolution. So whether you believe it or not, they believe it. A kind of Marxist insurrection is what they are aiming at. So these first few bullet points are copy and pasted from one of his posts where he's describing the things that he's found. He's got all the screenshots. All this stuff has ended up in the Trump administration, which is probably why Tim Walls is changing his tune in the last 24 hours or so, because a lot of this stuff turns out to be go to jail, don't pass go and collect $200 card that he pulled, right? So here are things that are going on in the background with what they believe is a communist revolution. So members list from vetting groups revealing hundreds of participants. So a lot of people are involved in these. Resource documents directing donors to the sites like Stand With Minnesota, which funneled money through tending the soil on chuffed.org. This exposed potential foreign involvement. The guy who runs chuffed.org is a Canadian who considers himself a community organizer. So know you have foreign funds that are making their way into these kinds of things. Exposed how protesters mistakenly destroyed civilian cars thinking they were ICE vehicles. So they have people standing on street corners and in car caravans taking photos of license plates. There's half a chance that somebody inside of a government system is running these license plates for them, so they know the names of individuals, or at least they know where these plates are and if they're ever close to ICE. So they're stopping random SUVs and stopping people on the street because one of these things have shown up and they've started to beat people and destroy property, mistakenly thinking that they were involved with ICE. Called out Minneapolis police for abandoning officers and residents, leaving federal police to step in and protect property. So until recently, the Minneapolis Police and State Patrol has been told to step back. Sure enough, the anti-ICE signal chats are agreeing with that. Highlighted how churches like New Creation Lutheran and Shapoki coordinated food for activists, potentially laundering donations as, quote, living expenses. So there are always churches that are willing to be dupes with events like this. So they're helping out as well. They know where to go. They know the names of the churches. Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, who suspected her handle was Flan in these, she deleted her Facebook account amid speculations that she's directly linked. So as of yesterday, there was some question whether or not it really was actually her. More and more lawyers and those involved this afternoon are saying, yes, we actually know it's the associate governor, the lieutenant governor of the state of Minnesota was in these chats helping to coordinate the funding and the activity of all of this. So now what that does legally is that is sedition. And now that people have been killed as a result, if you organized some of these things and people resisted law enforcement and died as a result, you are now also potentially guilty of federal murder, right? So she's deleted her social media accounts trying to get connected to this. It looks like she probably was right at the very center of this. And then we also learned that Tim Walz' campaign strategist was coordinating a lot of these anti-ICE activities from within. So these aren't protests. This isn't random stuff, just people who disagree with the administration. The reason I bring this up is because we have talked so often about how Marxism works inside of a culture, what it wants to do, how it tears things apart from the inside, and this is a lot of what we're watching happen right now. I'll let you read through this here if you want on the left. In reaction to the things that Ken Higby has been uploading and revealing, now we've got people with overseas special forces counterinsurgency experience saying, all of this looks exactly like counterinsurgency tactics. So this guy is saying, this is what we saw, this is what we saw, this is what we saw. And we see all of this inside of these chats. Watched one interview with Cam Higby, and really it is incredible because the guy a couple of weeks ago with the daycare centers and so forth, he's like 23. Cam Higby can't be a day over 24, 25 years old. But these guys now are doing the work that a lot of other journalists just haven't done for one reason or another. But he's been inside with these people for a very long time, involved in their conversations. So he kept saying inside of this interview that we watched, they're not smart people. They keep making mistakes, but they want to be violent. They're getting other people hurt and involved. He just kept laughing. He's saying, really, in the end, they're not smart people. So they're not smart people, but they are organized, and it turns out that they are really well funded. So they're clearly hitting their marks because this is what they want. Is they want as much chaos as possible inside of one of the signal chats. And then based on some of what this guy says here in his social media post, they are willing to let some of their pawns die in order to get at the larger force. So if a handful of the protesters die, that's fine. And we're going to talk about this in a second. We're going to turn them into what are called empathy traps. It doesn't matter what they did before they got killed or abducted or arrested. If you can get the right photograph out there or the right video angle out there, you can create an empathy trap. And you get a lot of people on your side believing a lie because you've pulled on their emotions. So this is the kind of stuff they're looking for. Churches are providing support, finding more and more of that. There are lots of gullible Christians out there who are telling you what's going on, and everything that they say has been disproven. Everything they say is false. Everything they say is either a made-up lie or something that is obviously false when the details come out. So a lot of Christians and a lot of churches are falling for these empathy traps. They've become very, very gullible. So be very careful with that. And I have to be careful with that because it's very frustrating to watch some of these people do these kinds of things. And remember, one of the reasons this is an important topic is that with Marxist revolutions, it is a little bit like we talked about last time with the Bolsheviks. It is anti-Christian, anti-church, anti-clerical. It's anti, and you can put anti in front of everything else that it is. It is meant to destroy, it is meant to pull down, it is meant to corrode, it is meant to be a virus. It doesn't build anything, it just destroys what is, and then gives you a lot of bumper stickers about equality and justice and decentering whiteness. That phrase makes my skin crawl every time I hear that one. So tear down the city and rule over the ruins is the unofficial motto of every communist revolutionary for a very long time. Even those who ruled, even those who succeeded for a little while, they just ruled over ruins until reality hit and it all fell apart. So, right? So we're not watching something innocent happening here. We're watching some really crazy things happening right now. I ran across this quote recently from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and that's a 50-cent name. Again, you can impress your friends with that one later on. Oh yeah, I heard what Alexander Solzhenitsyn said about this one. But a dissident from the Soviet Union, in fact, he was eventually just exiled from the Soviet Union, came to the West. He had a strong sense of spirituality. He spoke about the spiritual emptiness, not just of the Soviet Union, but even of the West. He warned the West was headed down this path as well. This is part of what he had to say about Marxist and Leninist revolutions. Within the philosophical system of Marx and Lenin, and at the heart of their psychology, hatred of God is the principal driving force, more fundamental than all their political and economic pretensions. So they'll tell you everything else that they want to do and everything else they want to accomplish and everything they want to fix and everything they want to tear down that's so desperately oppressive. He's a man who survived the Soviet gulags. He has a lot of wisdom with this, and he's absolutely right. Really, what it is about is a hatred to God, toward God, right? At its core, spiritually, that's the kind of warfare that's going on here. It's just anti-God kind of work. What's that? They're just not very smart. I love that line. And the more I follow this stuff, guys, and more I pay attention to some of the details, you guys know, if you've been suffering through Tuesday nights with me for a while now, you know that I've done a lot of reading on, the cultural Marxist thing, the woke stuff, the critical theory stuff, and what they say and what their goals are and what their tactics are. And we've talked about this a lot. Recently, I've been reading more and more about the history and the theology and the tactics of Islam and how they do things and how they want to do things. And we've talked about this weird coalition between the anti-God, woke Marxist leftist stuff and the Islamic jihadi stuff, right? We've talked about some of that. And this is just my personal opinion. The more I spend time with both of these, the more I believe they are the same demonic religion. The more I believe the tactics are the same, the goals are the same. As Heather and I were talking about this, she said, yeah, it's the same demon. Probably. Probably. You remove the religious language and you remove the weird woke language, and you can put these two together and they sound almost exactly the same. Every anti-God philosophy is going to boil down to the same kinds of things. That should not surprise us too much. All right, so there's a lot of that going on, right? I want us to put it through this lens again like we do on Tuesday nights often. There was another headline that showed up a couple of days ago. We talk about this issue from time to time. I wanted to bring this up. Because we talk about it often, it's not always on my radar until I see the next headline. And these headlines bother me, they disturb me, they should disturb us. And so I want to make sure we see it. I make sure we get a chance to talk about it a little bit. And it is the topic of euthanasia. So this headline just showed up a couple days ago. Against her will, elderly Canadian woman euthanized by government after husband got sick of caring for her. So I've given you a couple of snippets from the report itself. So the nation of Canada, a few years ago, passed this nationalized law, medical assistance in dying. I don't know what their technical name for it is, but you often hear it called a MAID program, M-A-I-D. And what it is a mail-order government-approved version of euthanasia. So if you qualify and you pass an assessment and you sign a piece of paper, you can have a little box mailed to you with instructions with a handful of medications in them. Those instructions tell you how and when to take those medications in order and over time, and you will kill yourself. So Canada has had this law now for several years, and they put it into law and they say, well, it only applies to this group of people. But I bring up these headlines every time we realize that, oh no, in fact, it applies to this group of people. Now it applies to this group of people. Not long ago, about a 23-year-old healthy young man in Canada, because he was depressed, successfully got qualified for the MAID program and he killed himself. Then we showed you pictures of brochures that Canada was handing out at health clinics where if you are a teenager and you find yourself full of anxiety and depression, you could also qualify for the MAID program. So then this headline, and you read this story, it's quite something. This woman had a medical procedure that went badly. It left her with a terminal condition. Her husband became her primary caregiver. When she got back to the hospital, the text here says, the next day he took her back to the ER. He told the doctors in the ER, I am tired of being her primary caregiver. So then the government sends someone to evaluate her. The first evaluation, she says, you're eligible for this. And she goes, well, I choose palliative care. Because of my faith, I choose palliative care instead of medical assistance in dying. Well, the husband wasn't happy with that, so they ended up getting a second evaluator. It got even more complicated. The husband was not getting his way, went back to the state. The state refused the palliative care. So you can see there, and when I read these things in these stories, this just makes my skin crawl. The first practitioner requested to meet Mrs. B again the following day, but that request was denied. The report said officials determined that, quote, the clinical circumstances necessitated an urgent provision. Instead, a third practitioner was sent to conduct an additional assessment. Mrs. B was approved by that practitioner and was euthanized later the same evening. The same evening, a woman who had, through at least 2 rounds of evaluators, said, I don't want this, I want palliative care. Her husband successfully got her murdered by the state. All right? You should also know, if you don't know, the state of Colorado also has a medical assistance in dying program. You can, under certain conditions, do the same thing in the state of Colorado. You can request it. It's called the Colorado End-of-Life Options Act, and it was actually voted in by the populace in November 2016. The law allows terminally ill, mentally capable adults to request and self-administer prescription medication to end their life peacefully if their suffering becomes unbearable. And this is a great twist to a law like this. It is not considered suicide, assisted suicide, homicide, or elder abuse under the law. So it's a new way of kind of hitting the end of life, is actually taking this. And I guarantee you, some of you probably know people who have had to interact with this on one level or another. Euthanasia end-of-life issues, friends, are complicated. I give you that. But understand the state of Colorado is ready to kill citizens with a little box that you can get in the mail. I did some research. I asked AI to do a bit of research for me. From the latest available data in 2024, Colorado keeps these things relatively hush-hush. Not a lot of names, not a lot of direct data, but in 2024, 510 prescriptions were written, 313 medications dispensed, death certificates received for 429 patients who are prescribed MAID or end-of-life options in 2024. So this is actually happening here in the state of Colorado. I love this little picture here. You should know that this is a rather infamous little graphic, this eugenics graphic. So we're talking about euthanasia, The Greek prefix and suffix for euthanasia means good death. Eugenics is Greek for a good birth. This illustration was created for the second annual International Eugenics Convention. I think it was 1921 or 1924 in the American History Museum in Washington, D.C. This was considered cutting-edge science 100 years ago. Who should live, who should die, and you kind of read there on the bottom, we're putting all of our scientific knowledge together to build this beautiful tree of life so that we have the good, healthy people living and growing, and we now have all of the ability to know who those people are. All of this stuff is eugenics on one level or another. Who should not be born, and who should die, and when should they die? Euthanasia laws are always slippery slope laws. Now, if you said that out loud to somebody who is pro-euthanasia laws, especially somebody who's not personally connected, but they're in the media, they're in academics, or whatever the case may be, you tell them that, and that little emoji with the guy with his head exploding, that's what you will watch happen in real time. When you tell them, and it's always a slippery slope, their heads explode. They say, oh, no. There are strict guidelines, and you don't understand. These people desperately need to have access to this. And the state makes sure that this never happens. And their heads explode, and they tell you it's not a slippery slope. Then you come back 2 or 3 later, and you discover, well, those guidelines don't belong here. Those guidelines are actually here now. Then you come back 2 or 3 years later, and you realize, oh, well, those guidelines are over here now. History and facts show us that the state is ready to get rid of as many people as they possibly can. It's just the way these laws work historically. End-of-life issues are always, if not often, if not always complicated, medically, emotionally, biologically, financially, the whole thing. I used to teach in-person philosophy and ethics classes at Pikes Peak State College at the time. I don't think I would touch that job with a 100-foot pole right now. But in that side of that ethics class, we would always do a segment on euthanasia. And we would discuss the issues involved in euthanasia. I did that for several semesters, and almost without fail, one person in the class, halfway through that class, would start to cry, and they'd have to get up and they'd have to leave. Because it wasn't a theoretical thing to them, it was a real thing to them. Grandma or grandpa or aunt or uncle or somebody was going through the process right now, and here we are in a class talking about it in kind of a clinical, philosophical fashion. So these things are very, very emotional and very, very personal. But for the Christian, with all of that being said, the default position has to be the biblical pro-life position from conception to natural end of life. Whatever is said beyond that point or dealt with beyond that point, this is where Christians have to begin. This is the taproot of the ethics of this issue, okay? Because as soon as you sever from that taproot, then crazy things start to happen. Without the image of God theology, the belief that every human being is created by God in the image of God gives us this taproot belief that every human being is of inestimable worth in the image of God, and we should do everything that we could, everything that we can to protect that life from conception to natural death. Even if we don't conceive of that constantly, we're like fish inside of that water. We've been living in that environment for a very long time. So hopefully, when we read stories about Mrs. B being killed by the state against her will, something inside of us just revolts. It should. Something inside of us should get just a little bit sick at that. Because without the image of God theology, people immediately, whether practically or not, theoretically, immediately, people become commodified and dispensable. Because then if you remove that objective value to the human soul, all value in the human soul then becomes subjective. Who decides that Mrs. B is important enough to live until she dies a natural death? Well, certainly not her husband, certainly not her. right? She's not valuable enough to make that decision. So will the baby be an inconvenience? On one end of life, you've got these questions. Will the baby be an inconvenience? I hope you realize this. Fewer than 1% of abortions in the U.S. are performed for what are considered to be medical life-threatening reasons. According to what's a group called the Guttemacher Institute, not a Christian organization, but they're pro-abortion and they track abortion statistics around the world, nation by nation, state by state inside of the U.S. And according to some of their stats recently, about 0.3% of abortions are performed for the life-saving medical purposes of the mother. All other abortions are one form or another of convenience abortions. Now, OBGYNs who are pro-life who talk about this, they will tell you that actually, technically, there's no such thing as a life-threatening abortion because the solution is to give birth to the child. The solution isn't kill the child, the solution is give birth to the child. That's how you save the mother's life, right? So, what happens when the state gets involved with the abortion industry? What happens when the abortion industry starts to receive state funds to abort as many babies as possible? Well, you're going to get bizarre and frightening stats like this. And then you've always got to ask yourself the question, is it cheaper for the state to euthanize or provide end-of-life care? Which is cheaper? A little box with 2 or 3 boxes of pills in them and a piece of paper that tells you how to do it, or palliative care for who knows how long? Which is cheaper? So, according to yes, ma'am.
At the present time, hospice care is completely covered by Medicare. And let me tell you, I know how much it costs. I will say, yeah, it's cheap. It would be cheaper.
Yes.
And the scary thing is, think about a time coming when they said that we're not going to cover that anymore.
Yes. And this is part of what's frightening with the state running healthcare. So Medicaid or Medicare covering hospice expenses, those kinds of things, right? That's a government expense. A little box with a few pills in it, that's a government expense. Well, which one's going to win out, right? So it's going to be very expensive for the state or very inexpensive for the state. So it's not too shocking that whatever state organization was involved in Canada there in our story went ahead and sent out that third person to make sure they could have the cheap expense, right? So maybe that's a little skeptical, but not out of the realm of possibility. So according to Canada, in 2024, medical assistance in dying deaths accounted for just over 5% of the total deaths in the nation of Canada. Just over 5% of all deaths in 2024 were people killed by the state. A little box of pills, right? This is why Christians must cling to the foundation of our image of God theology. You can't let go of that, even if you want to talk about other things at the end of life. I understand that, but you cannot let go of that taproot. You just simply cannot do it. All of these things, right? We always have to remind ourselves so they don't get all black-pilled and frustrated with the world. God is not overcome or confused, and we do not despair. Okay, we need to keep this in mind. None of this confuses God or causes him to finally go to plan B. There's nothing like that going on. We should remind ourselves of what Jesus told Peter after Peter confessed that he was the Christ. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Whatever the technical meaning of that verse is, however you want to deal with that, bottom line, Jesus is saying the gates of hell simply will not prevail against the church. I'm going to build it. The kingdom of heaven will be powerful through the church that I am going to build, and this is who you people are. The confession that Jesus is Lord is that Jesus is Lord, right? Then in Psalm chapter 2, you read Psalm chapter 1, you go, oh, that's a beautiful, wonderful psalm. I think I'll memorize that and I'll write it down and I'll keep it on my mirror in the mornings. Then you get to Psalm chapter 2 and you go, the nations are raging against God. They gather together to cast off the chains of God that are binding them. And in Psalm chapter 2, verse 4, in the turmoil of the nations raging against God, he who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. So whatever goes on around us, and the rest of Psalm 2 is basically God saying, I'm going to put my king on the throne anyway, right? So we're the church of Jesus Christ. He is the one who is building it. He is the one who is King of Kings and will be King of Kings. Our job is to faithfully endure as witnesses in this world to that kingdom until he comes. Amen? That is important stuff. All right. So, yes, this is great. This is coming from a former Army ER nurse. Yes, these things are difficult and complicated things that I, obviously have not personally experienced in my life, but are very real for people. And that's the right advice, is to pray and support as much as possible. It really is.